So next we're going to be talking about the stages of grief. Sometimes they're called the stages of death, most often stages of grief though. And essentially what this is that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969 interviewed over 200 terminally ill people. So that's why sometimes we hear stages of death too, because these individuals were terminally ill to talk about their reactions. And she essentially wanted to know, are reactions predictable when one is diagnosed or going through an illness? And so she has these 5 stages. So essentially these were conceived as, one right after another, although we'll talk about what that looks like in terms of research after I go through all 5. You will need this information for cross-cultural assignment number 3. If you want more information about it, you certainly can just wiki it. This is quite famous information and has been used in all different types of therapeutic settings. So the first stage, again, when she was interviewing these terminally ill patients, was denial. And essentially, individuals who receive a diagnosis that they have a terminal illness, she said, would often go through this at first. So just deny how serious the prognosis was, refuse to accept it, and maybe even avoid discussing it with anybody. So kind of just pretending like it's not real, it's not happening, they didn't hear it, and or like, well, the doctors say that this is going to happen, but no, it's not going to be that bad. In the moment, denial can be positive because it's reducing emotional distress, but this is just very temporary because it is a reality. So for, avoiding things broadly, not just with death or with dying, avoidance can be a good coping mechanism for the temporary, but long term we have to deal with our emotions and deal with our life circumstances, and it can't be a forever coping mechanism. Eventually it's not coping anymore. The problem with denial is that by not talking about it and just denying that, this illness is real, is that it's closing people out. People might want to be helping, and you're not getting the social support that you need, and or just dealing with the problem broadly. And so again, denial has some positive benefits in the short term, but eventually we need to move beyond that stage broadly. So yes, this is the first stage in Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. The next one is anger. And so she would argue that after we, are thinking about this as like, it's not that serious, or I'm not going to talk about it, then the next emotion that is felt is anger. So usually this anger is directed at family members. The reason it's directed towards family members is those are the people who you're interacting with most. Those are the people who are going to love you even if you're showing anger to them. And then also doctors and medical providers. But essentially, this is the idea that, like, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. I haven't had the chance to do all that I want to do. This is just this sense of unfairness. And unfairness often results in this feeling of anger broadly, not just in these cases. So again, that's stage number 2. The third stage, according to Kubler-Ross's model, is the bargaining stage. So essentially, individuals will engage in this process of, if only I can make it to my granddaughter's birth, or if only I can, wait until this time, then I can die. Essentially, individuals are making deals with family, friends, doctors, if they are religious, maybe God. At this point, they are realizing that death is inevitable, but just trying to hold on. And I think part of it is trying to hold on to some sense of control. Like, if only I can do it, and wait until this point, until I'm no longer here. The fourth stage of dying is depression. So after denial and anger and bargaining fail to really postpone the illness, then it is kind of like this sense of control is lost. And so when that happens, the individual may feel really sad, depressed, experience the time of increased or intensified suffering, because realizing that, you know, it is inevitable and there's nothing that they can do and they don't have control over the situation. In life broadly, if we feel like we don't have life, you know, control over the situation in life, then this can lead us to have some depressive symptomatology. So the same idea is presented here. And the last stage is acceptance. And from the data, from Kubler-Ross's data, that most are reaching acceptance, and this idea that, you know, this is something that is real, it's going to happen to me, and I'm okay with that. That, you know, I've achieved this sense of peace about upcoming death. And just broadly, again, she suggested that individuals are going through these stages in this order, and the research on these ideas is mixed. Like, does everybody go through these same stages in the same order? No. Does everybody make it through all 5 stages? No. And so, just like when we talked about the problems of stage theories, although those were more problematic, but Erikson or Piaget, you know, there are problems with those approaches. The one size fits all method isn't just likely. But at the same time, we do see a lot of evidence of these stages in those who are terminally ill. So we can't say that these stages are universal, but they are also quite common. And it also is the case that somebody may go into a stage and then come out of a stage and then go back into that stage. So, you know, there might be some cyclical aspects of this grief process too, and or the stages of death. I hope that this helps when you are doing your cross-cultural number 3 assignment. This YouTube video that I have a link for on here will be, or is put on Moodle already, and essentially it's just a comical approach to the stages of dying or the stages of grief. And it's not that I think that these stages have to be funny, but you know, this is a normal part of the lifespan, and so I think that other representations of it can be you know, just lighten the mood for today's class. So I encourage you to check that out. The book chapter actually talks a fair amount about how death is perceived across the lifespan. So, like, how do children view death? How do adolescents view death? And so on. We're not going to go into much detail about that, but we do tend to see changes over the course of the lifespan and how death is viewed. So, for example, in early adulthood, it's quite common to think or to see early adults who kind of avoid thoughts of death, maybe because it doesn't apply to them, or maybe because it is a scary idea, or there's too much that they want to achieve before, you know, death is occurring to them. But we see some more avoidance, not necessarily at the point where it's problematic, like as I was talking about previously with the stages of grief and avoidance, but you know, it's still like not really thinking about it all the time. But by late adulthood, people report that they're thinking about death more commonly. It probably and most likely is because it is seemingly closer. Although we never know exactly when death is coming, or at least not for those, except for those who, well, even with those who have terminal illnesses, but still it's closer than ever before. So it's not necessarily problematic or not problematic to be thinking about it or to not be thinking about it for most individuals, right? It is just a normal part of reality, normal part of the lifespan. That said, there are people who have death anxiety, and this is actually at the level of, you know, causing psychological problems or disturbances. If we are really caught up on any one thing and having anxiety symptoms, it can impact our lives and our activities and what we choose to do. So death anxiety really is this fear and apprehension of death. It is just anxiety, but anxiety focused on death, or let's say a phobia around death. This little survey right here from Thorson and Powell from 1994 is still used today, but it's essentially some of the items used to assess death anxiety, and perhaps you can, you know, go through it yourself and see how you might score, although I don't have the rating scale of, you know, 1 to 5 or whatever. But, so for example, I hate the idea that I'll be helpless after I die. The total isolation of death is frightening to me. For some of you, I can imagine, well, in normal times, for some of you, I can imagine that these things aren't things that are crossing your mind. But for some of you, it might be more apparent, and that could be because of your life situation, the people in your life. I think for many of us right now, with this pandemic going on, these thoughts might be more present in our minds than in previous times. I think people who are, parents and thinking about their kids, or people who are thinking about their parents and worrying about death. I think this is a hard topic to talk about right now because of the pandemic. But again, for many of us, thinking about these things alone isn't problematic. Even worrying about these isn't problematic. But if it comes to the point where it is causing significant distress in our lives and or impacting our activities and behaviors, then this is where it might be really helpful to talk to somebody about these types of thoughts.